Hello students, welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In today's video, we are going to discuss about a heat wave that has been observed in the coldest region of the world, that is the coldest continent also we can say, which is Antarctica. So we are witnessing heat wave in Antarctica, which is a very rare phenomena. So what are the possible causes behind it and what are the possible effects or implications we can see from these development? Let us try to understand this. So to give you the context of this particular topic, actually, it is for the second time over a period of 2 years, we are witnessing what we can call as a record breaking heat wave that is sweeping the entire continent of Antarctica, and that too when Antarctica is at its height of winter season. Keep in mind when you're talking about the winter season, because we have two hemispheres, and if we have summer in northern hemisphere, the season is reversed, that it is the winter in the southern hemisphere. So since we are having summer season in northern hemisphere, that is why in Antarctica we are witnessing the peak of winter season. Now the ground temperature, try to understand, have been almost 10 degrees Celsius higher than what is the normal temperature in this period of times, that is somewhere in the, we can say, in the end of July to August, and on an average talk about up to 28 degrees Celsius higher than certain days we have observed in this particular month. In part of eastern Antarctica, now eastern Antarctica is the area that is also the largest, we can say it consists of or it comprises of two-thirds of the world's coldest continent, and temperatures are currently in the range of -25 to -30. Now obviously it seems a very low temperature, because if you take a reference point as temperature that we observe or we see encounter in our daily life, but if you look at from the perspective of Antarctica, it is still a very warm temperature. Why I am saying this? Because general temperature that prevails in these areas range from -50 to -60 degrees Celsius. So we are having now -25 to -30. So almost 25-30 degree of difference. That means we can say difference on the positive side is what we are observing in this particular continent. Now, what are the possible reasons behind these heat wave? Now, two regions or main regions have been identified by the scientists. The first region is basically this heat wave in Antarctica is a consequence of what we can call as the weakening of the polar vortex. Now, we try to look at this particular image here. Polar vortex refer to a band of cold air and low pressure system that spins around the poles of Earth in the stratosphere. And the objective, or basically you can say the function of this polar vortex is basically to keep the cold air trapped over Antarctica, as you can see from here, and it does not let the hot air to enter the Antarctican landmass. So the vortex usually remains strong and stable during winter in the southern hemisphere over the Antarctican landmass. Now this year what we are witnessing is that this polar vortex, its stability, its strength has weakened. Basically it has become disturbed, and this disturbance is due to the large scale atmospheric waves, that is a periodic disturbance in the field of atmospheric variables that we have encountered here. Let us try to understand this in more detail about the polar vortex. So actually if you look at the image here, this basically is example of a stable polar vortex. In the stable polar vortex, as you can see, we have the polar jet stream that flows around the 60 degree of latitude, and within this polar jet stream we have a vast swath of cold air that is contained over Antarctica. So this is how it does not allow this strong polar vortex, you can say, it does not allow the warm air to enter the Antarctica. But whenever this disturbance happens in what we can say is the polar vortex, as we can see, the polar vortex, rather than having a stable shape, it start to go in a zigzag fashion, and that is why the cold air start to move in the southern hemisphere or in the southern direction, while warm air start to move further to the north, and that causes the warming of the Antarctican landmass. So the vortex releases trapped cold air and opens the door for the warmer air to enter the region. As this warmer air traveled downwards from the upper atmosphere, it caused an increase in temperature. So this is something that we can easily explain by looking at the difference between both diagrams. To also understand basically the polar jet streams that we are talking about, it is found about 5 to 9 miles above the surface, while the cold air that we are talking about, this is stable somewhere at the height of 10 to 30 miles above the surface. Now, how rare is it? So, if you look at the research scientists, they have said that it is a very, very rare phenomena that happens once every 2 decades, that means once every 20 years on an average, so very unusual phenomena. And reduction of the extent of Antarctic sea ice could also be at the play here. That is also causing the warming of the Antarctica. One is the disturbance in polar vortex. The second major reason that we have talked about is the reduction in the extent of the ice sheet or ice layer. So in June, if you try to understand how the ice sheet have declined, the calculation or the measurement that were made in June, it has clearly established the extent of Antarctic sea ice was second lowest ever for the time of year. The first or the maximum lowest intensity of the ice or extent of ice we have recorded in June of 2023, and this is the second time we have the lowest extent of the sea ice. Now let us try to understand this also in more detail. Now the main, we can say, benefit of sea ice that prevails over Antarctic landmass is that it keeps temperature down in the polar areas, as the sea ice has high albedo in liquid water. Now, albedo basically is a ratio that measures the amount of light that is reflected upon the amount of total light that is incident on the surface. So, higher the albedo means higher the reflection. Higher the reflection means lesser the absorption, and lesser or lower the absorption, lesser or lower will be the extent of heating. So, greater the extent of sea ice, minimum or minimal will be the extent of heating, keeping the temperature of Antarctic cold. So, sea ice also ensures that air remains cool by acting as a barrier between the cold air and relatively warmer water that is present below the surface. Because in the polar areas, the surface temperature of water is relatively lower. As you go deeper, temperature slightly rises. Basically, we can say from minus to 0 and from 0 further to minus 2, 3, 4 degrees Celsius, something like that. So it is likely that having less sea ice and warmer southern ocean around the Antarctic continent loads the dice. What we can say is the warmer winter weather over the Antarctic landmass. So in this context, we can say that the global warming, the atmosphere, the climatic phenomena, the climate change phenomena that largely we talk about is hitting Antarctica harder than anywhere else on the planet. In other way, the impact and effect of global warming over Antarctica is much more than what we are seeing in other regions of the world. For example, if you look at the warming rate itself, the Antarctic warming rate as calculated by research scientists who published their research in Nature journal on the climate change, they said that Antarctica is warming at the rate of 0.22 to 0.32 degrees Celsius per decade, which is almost twice as fast as the rest of the world. And to also prove this point, if you look at the paper published by the IPCC, that is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it also has clearly estimated that Earth as a whole, if you talk about, is warming at the rate of 0.4 to 0.14 to 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade. So obviously the Antarctic's rise is almost twice as much as that of the rest of the world. Now, what can be the possible fallouts? So obviously, further the losses we see in the Antarctic ice sheet, which is the largest ice sheet on the world, and apart from that, the world's other major ice sheet we have over the Greenland. So obviously, as more and more ice melts, there is a potential, we can say there is a potential of rising the global sea level by hundreds of feet in the coming decades. And Antarctica already has lost 280% more ice mass in the last 2 decades, that means in 2000s and 2010s, than what it lost if you compare with the previous 2 decades, that is 1980s and 1990s. So according to 2019 study that was published in the journal PNAS. So obviously it is something that need to alarm us. And also if you look at the March 2022 period, the continent, the Antarctica, witnessed its largest heat wave, and temperatures in East Antarctica that we have discussed is the largest landmass of Antarctica, soared to 39 degrees Celsius above normal temperature prevailing at that time. A portion of the ice sheet, due to this fact, that was almost as big as the size of the entire city of Rome, collapsed and then melted out. So this is what we are talking about as the possible fallout. Now, as the melting progresses, it is believed that in Antarctica ice sheet, it is a glacier consisting 98% of the Antarctic continent, and it holds more than 60% of world total fresh water. So, if entirely melted, it can submerge coastal cities and reshape the entire world's map. Large areas of the countries which are having a coastline, including India, and many countries which are small island countries, they might be completely submerged if these ice sheet keeps on melting. A sea level rise of only a few feet will displace roughly 230 million people, and that also we will see the impact in the eastern and western coast of India also, who live within about 3 feet of the high tide line today. And this effect of this is something we are already witnessing in the countries such as Panama, which has recently evacuated a large number of people from one of its islands due to the sea level change or sea level rise. Now, what about the effect on ocean circulation? So, rising temperature will also impact the global ocean circulation system, because if you talk about the global ocean circulation system, it is also referred as a conveyor belt system, because it transports warm water from the tropic to polar areas and then transport the cold water from polar areas toward the tropical areas. Now, this ocean circulation or ocean conveyor belt basically regulates the climate of Earth by storing and transporting heat, the carbon, nutrients, as well as fresh water around the world. So, what is changing in this? Now, the melting ice in Antarctica is slowing down this circulation because the concentration or the volume of cold water is increasing, and the fresh water from melting ice also is reducing the salinity as well as the density of the surface water, and it diminishes the downward flow to the ocean's bottom, that is also called as downwelling. So not only the horizontal flow, but also the vertical transport of water in the ocean is impacted due to the sea level rise, due to the melting of the ice in the Antarctica. So what we can say in the conclusion, that overall, as the Antarctic ice sheets and the sheets of the Greenland and the Arctic region keeps on melting, we will witness a slower and slower global ocean circulation system, and over a large period of time, over a long period of time, this can cause lesser absorption of heat, less absorption of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, intensify global warming, because lesser the absorption of CO2, that means more CO2 we have in the atmosphere, and higher the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, more trapping of heat in the Earth's atmosphere will be observed. That will obviously raise the temperature or atmospheric temperature and increase the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, which is in the form of heavy rainfall, which is in the form of intense tropical cyclones, and this will further result into floods and droughts in different regions of the world. So not only we are talking about a limited impact or effect of the Antarctic ice sheet melting, we will see a large scale ramifications on the climate of entire world, and this will result into natural disasters, natural hazards across many regions of the world. The Wayanad landslide being the case in point. So that is all about this particular video. I hope you understood the regions and the effect that we can witness due to the heat waves that we are witnessing or observing in the Antarctic region. Thank you very much.